All questions you will hear today are coming from students. The opportunity to submit questions was submitted to colleges across the state. It is also the live stream opportunity was also extended to those colleges. And the point is, the hope of this debate is to have student questions that are pertinent to issues relating to youth in this upcoming election cycle, and then the issues that youth are interested in.
As you know, there is 4 candidates on the ballot. We have extended invitations to all 4 candidates. Unfortunately, Senator King was unable to make today. But without further ado, we will introduce the 3 candidates we do have. And so Demi Kouzounas, the Republican candidate, David Costello, the Democratic candidate, and Jason Cherry, the Independent. So we'll go over the rules really quickly. We're going to start with 1-minute opening statements on the predetermined order that we've already set out. All questions will be asked to each candidate, and each candidate gets a minute answer and 30 seconds rebuttal they can use if they'd like. We will be opening at our discretion into discussion segments if we believe it will massively benefit the debate. David Costello.
Right, so thank you, Zach and Natalie, and go Polar Bears, right? I'll suck up a little bit. Just so that you get a little bit of background, I cut my political teeth on picket lines in Old Town and Bangor as a boy, so I grew up in Maine. I'm running for the U.S. Senate now because I think, well, I suspect, like many of you, I believe that Washington is broken and that we need to do a lot more than simply change whom we elect every 2 to 6 years. We need to substantially reform our governing practices and institutions, and we need to eliminate the excessive and corrupting influence that money, wealth, and disinformation have over our politics and government. Having grown up in a working class family in Old Town, Maine, and having served for more than 25 years in senior level government positions, including in Maine and abroad, I believe that we've got to do a substantial amount of reforming. And I hope to talk about that in the debate. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Demi Kouzounas. I'm a born Mainer, born to hardworking legal immigrants. I'm a veteran, mother, grandmother, dentist, educator, and small business owner. Early on, I learned the values of hard work working at my parents' restaurant, starting at the age of 14. Those values carried me through life as I worked and also served in the U.S. Army in Germany during the Cold War from 81 to 84. But today, the American dream is slipping away. Our state is struggling with high inflation, broken open border policies, and failed leadership in Washington, D.C. Senator King has been a politician for nearly 2 decades, and things are not getting any better. They're getting worse. I think it's time for a change, and I'm running to bring new ideas and new leadership to Washington, D.C. We need the American dream to be there for my grandchildren and their children. Thank you.
I'm Jason Cherry, and I'm running to promote public ownership of government. And so you've heard 2 stories about the Democrats and Republicans and how horrible DC is corrupted. And I can tell you as a former FBI agent, criminal defense attorney, and conservation officer, I have the balance and experience. And the reason why DC is this way is because of a 2-party monopoly over what it means to be conservative, over what it means to be liberal, and the infighting and the crazy presidential election that we have. I'm here to represent ranked choice voting to increase competency, accountability, efficiency, and transparency for government, for public to own government. I come with a law degree. We have legislative makers, and I'm the only one here that actually knows how to read case law. So you need an attorney, you need a law understander, you need someone that's educated. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So let's move to our first question. The undue influence of money in politics worries many young people today. Given that you've all been significantly outraised by Senator King's campaign, firstly, want to know what your opinion on this race's finances are, and secondly, on referendum 1, which proposes capping PAC contributions to $5,000 here in Maine. David Costello, you have to
start with me. Well, first, I would answer yes on 1. I absolutely believe we need to cap. I also believe we need to overturn Citizen United, which many of you probably understand, where the Supreme Court basically identified a corporation as a person. And I mean, as I said in my opening, I think one of the worst things in our democracy, or diminishes our democracy, is the amount of money involved, the wealth and the disinformation as well. And I support it very much. Maine has a wonderful in-state clean elections law. I'd love to see a national clean elections law. I'd support public financing as an option. There have been a number of bills in the past that would have a public finance option. I would certainly support that, and support a very robust public financing, as well as a limit on the amount of time that campaigns can actually campaign, similar to what happens in much of Northern Europe.
All right, we'll have Demi go next.
I'm in agreement. I think there's so much money in politics, but the problem here is we could go ahead and do initiatives and we can all be in agreement, but we have to obviously follow the law and follow what the Supreme Court has said about PACs. I agree. I think Citizen Initiative has just thrown so much money. I mean, you got presidential candidates right now going through $1 billion. And can you all imagine what we could do with $1 billion, and how much reform and how many issues we could solve with $1 billion? So we're all folks that we're totally outraged by Senator King, and he has gotten PACs from defense contractors. I mean, I can go on and on with some of the money he's received. And I agree, we need to do better than that. I'm not sure that where the campaign finance reforms should go, but we need to do something about that. So we're in agreement on that.
And let's end with Jason Cherry, please.
Definitely in favor of limiting corruption and the amount of money that's going into these campaigns. So if you remember 2020, almost $200 million were collected. A high 90% of that was out of Maine. So how can we as Mainers have any voice in our elections when that type of influence is added to those elections? We need to have politicians that are working towards the middle class income, that they have an understanding of what it takes to run a business, but also how to take care of those people that are vulnerable. We cannot do so when these super PACs are putting in billions of dollars trying to influence with disinformation. So we have a big issue with that. How can we reform if we don't have the absolute truth?
Yeah, and Zach, and maybe my colleagues would like to add as well. I would add one other thing. The way to bring down the cost of campaigning is through media. I mean, a tremendous amount of that money goes into television. So a way to bring down costs is free media. And so if you look at our race, you asked about Senator King. He spent about $5 or $6 million. I've spent 25 grand. I know Demi spent more, but we haven't spent anything close. And what happens if you spend money on media, they tend to follow you. So our race has gotten very little attention, and I think a lot of that attention or lack of attention is because of the amount of money we're spending.
Anyone else that would like to jump in on this?
I think, unfortunately, some of the media companies here in Maine have lived down to the reputation. They've been having machinations. They have allowed for debates to occur very late in the season. Usually it's September. These are been set towards October, end of October and November. So very clear machinations from the King campaign to avoid an open discussion about some of his proposals, one of which is to raise the eligibility of Social Security to 70 years old for your generation.
All right. The next question, Maine has a significant workforce shortage right now. Many students graduate and go elsewhere for better economic opportunities. How do you see the federal government involved in boosting opportunities, specifically cost of living issues in Maine?
David?
Me start. Well, I think the most important thing is the wages. I mean, as you all know, obviously a great deal of discussion has been about the inflation. 20%, roughly an added 20% for the cost of goods over the past 4 years, roughly. And now the good news, the Fed's brought down the inflation rate to below 3%. So it's sort of been normalized. But if you really want to address the concerns that many have about being able to pay the bills, wages is a problem. We've got a national minimum wage that's only $7 an hour. Who's going to live on that? What family can live on that? We certainly need to bring that up to at least $14 or $15 an hour, closer to a living wage. That's one way. We need also to expand programs that directly provide assistance to families in need, whether it's a child care tax credit of $6,000 a year to a family with children. Earned income tax credits work awfully well. In Maine, low-end income energy assistance is important to pay electric bills as well as to pay for home heating. And I would add Social Security, we can extend and expand benefits to those who need more, and they certainly need more in Maine.
Absolutely. We'll go to Demi next.
So you're 100% right, and it's a very interesting situation. I trained dentists with the UNE because I worked very hard when I was president of Maine Dental to open UNE Dental School, to have a dental school here in Maine, because we knew we had a workforce shortage in areas, access to care issues in the state of Maine. And so I had an externship site in Skowhegan, Maine, and had about 25 dental students come to Maine, up there to work for literally 12 weeks. We lowered the cost of the procedures that were provided so low-income people could come in and see the students. It was a perfect situation. And I wanted to keep these students here in Maine, but you know what they did? They left. Why? Housing. They have, the average dental student has $700,000 worth of debt. And so we need to look at the educational system and housing, and I know I'm running out of time, and I'll come back to it if I get a chance to. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. Jason.
So in addition to a law degree, I also have a focus on international business and trade. So if you were hiring representatives, what would you want them to have? A legal degree, potentially so they can write legislation as a senator, and also to know about the economy, because it impacts everything that we do. It impacts our military, it impacts the social benefits. So you're absolutely correct. If we cannot raise wages here in Maine, we need to think about how we do that in a way that those costs are not passed on to the consumer. So if you remember the last minimum wage bump, the rule of thumb is that lunch cost about the same as a minimum wage, $15. Everything went up. Those costs for the minimum wage got passed to the consumers. So how do we handle that? It's by taxing them fairly and using that tax money to increase the technical opportunities here in Maine. We are very close to Canada. They have a lot of diversified electrified grids, and we can work with them to strengthen.
Great, thank you. We're going to go back to Demi.
So some of the concerns that students had, housing. You can't afford housing. Housing is up, inflation went up 20%, housing went up 40%. So they have to pay their debt. Buying a car, energy costs, gas costs, because in Maine you travel further than most other states to get to work. And let's be real, you can't raise the cost of dental care, let's say in my case, I can speak for myself, because it makes it very, very expensive for people to have dental care. And if they don't have insurance or they don't have a good job that provides insurance, they can't afford it. So there's a little mix of everything. We got to lower the cost down and bring the wages up, but not so much that you're just increasing inflation, because that's what you're really doing.
David?
I would just add quickly, and maybe we'll get tax policy question later, but I would say in terms of all of the programs we're talking about are the wages, those people at that level, all of that money is going back into the economy. It's generating more economic output. So when I talk about government assistance, I'm talking about programs that really not only help those in need, but quite frankly, the communities they live in, including the businesses. So I'd want us all to keep that in mind. That is very generative money and from an economic standpoint. But maybe Jason wants to get in.
Yeah, I think they've both gotten
We're
a second say. And picture in your mind that tomorrow minimum wage is $50. How much are groceries going to cost tomorrow? This is just a natural teetering. Is once you raise the minimum wage, everything else gets raised up as well. We should raise the minimum age, but we need to do so in a manner so those costs are not passed on to the consumer. If you've seen a great increase in costs, it's because that restaurant owner that's paying $8 an hour is paying $16 an hour, is now charging you more for that. It's just common sense.
And I'm in agreement with that. For example, Maine Care pays for a cleaning in my dental office, $30. But my hygienist now, because we don't have enough providers, so that raises the wages up, is getting paid $50 an hour. Guess what my office may not do is accept a Maine Care patient. So we have to balance. This is not one item. We have to really look at the whole thing and balance it out. But because inflation went up so quickly and nothing kept up with it, there you have the issue.
We'll hear one last point from David Costello.
Yeah, I'll just be real quick. Remember, most people who get minimum wage don't work in a restaurant. I mean, that's one example. But it's also important to know that when people raise prices, a lot of people, I mean, let's face it, most of the people who are making money off of our economy are very wealthy investors in a broad range of companies, including Yum and McDonald's and all of these other large companies that don't pay a lot in wages. The balance for them in terms of raising their prices isn't just about the wage they give their employees. They could take a cut in their stock dividends, for one. So anyway, I think we've got to, and I think if you look at most economic studies, minimum wage rises have not hurt the economy. On balance, they've helped.
Okay, let's move on. So the US national debt now sits at 35 trillion about, and last year's deficit, 1.8 trillion. Increased debt remains a tax on our generation who might have to deal with the eventual consequences of this. How does Congress work to mitigate this issue, and what would you do if you become a senator? Let's start with Jason Cherry, please.
Part of what I did in the federal government is I had 430 people that I was a supervisor for as a section chief, and then also a budget of $100 million. So every day I lived the budget, every day I sat down with the budget. You have to balance incoming versus outgoing. And I will tell you, as a federal government official for 20 years, we wasted money. We wasted a ton of money. Yeah. And it is, you know, as I said in the last debate, it's like AA. You've got to admit you've got a problem before you can fix it. And the federal government does not admit to it. Now you will fix cost expenditures, but you've got to raise the money up. So there was an Irish contractor named Charles Littlejohn. He provided evidence that this nation's government taxes the top 1% in a manner that is outrageous. Jeff Bezos puts in $80,000 and was taxed off of that. I pay 34%, so we must fix that.
Demi?
Absolutely right. It is outrageous that we're at 36 trillion. So have a little bit of an idea where we're at. Social Security is the #1 thing we spend money on. Healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid, that's #2. And guess what? What we pay for the deficit, the interest rates on the deficit is #3. It doesn't even equal to the defense spending. Like I said, I'm not for a war or anything, but we still want to have it there in case we need to take care of our allies. It went up for $400 billion from last year to this year, just the interest on our debt. So this has become a humongous problem. Now let's say taxing the rich. We take all the rich people in the whole United States and we put them all together, they don't equal $36 trillion. So we have to look for a lot of ways, including not spending. And we'll get back to that, I know. Thank you.
And David?
Well, like Jason, I've worked in government as well. I worked for the mayor of Baltimore, I worked for the governor of Maryland, and I worked for the USAID, the Foreign Assistance Agency. So I would agree with Jason, there is a lot of waste in government. Take a look at my website. I've got a performance commission idea that I think could help to deal much more effectively with waste. But in terms of the revenue question, because it's not about spending. It's not just about spending. We've got to get spending under control. We've got to be much smarter with our spending and more cost effective. But we also have to be real about where the debt came from. Much of the debt we have today, much of that $35 trillion, $36 trillion, because of outrageous tax cuts by the Bush administration and Trump administration, and also the unnecessary war in Iraq. So if you want to talk about where all of that debt came from, we've got to talk to our Republican friends about getting real about raising taxes on those who can pay taxes and being fair and smart with our revenue and our spending. So I'll
Demi,
stop.
you were inadvertently mentioned.
Absolutely. So in the last 4 years, we had $10 trillion that was spent. To give you an idea where it was spent, in Rockland, they got $5 million to build 5 EV charging stations. $5 million for 5 charging stations. What I would have done with the $5 million, I would have opened a couple of community centers to deal with addiction. Why aren't we doing this? We're spending money and it's wasteful. And now we're going to have to pay that money back. This is across the board blame, which is what I said from the very beginning. We have failed leadership in Washington, D.C. We need to go ahead and put our foot down and say, no, we can't keep on spending this way and not expect our children and grandchildren to be paying that money back.
Jason Cherry.
This is why I am very proud to be an independent and not an Angus King vote with the Democrats 90%. And I'm not liberal. I'm a former defense attorney. I have a lot of aspects to me beyond that. But it's the blame game between these two political parties. Nikki Haley ran, and I don't agree with a lot of her policy, but she said that this desire to have you pay for Social Security or not get Social Security until you're 70 is because both Republicans and Democrats. And what do? They just point at each other and say, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. They have both engaged in this behavior. They both have their 1% donors. They both are, in DC, it is too corrupt and inefficient.
We're going to move on to the next question now.
Yeah.
All right. Following up on the topic of debt, where do each of you stand on student loan forgiveness and potential congressional solutions to this issue? Starting with Demi.
Perfect. I can tell you, when I graduated from dental school, I was so much in debt that I actually joined the U.S. Army and served overseas because I figured I might as well go see Europe if I'm going to be in the military anyways for 3 years. And they didn't pay my loans back, but they deferred my payments for 3 years so I can get my feet from underneath me and be able to buy a car, which I didn't have one because I was living in Boston, so we didn't have a vehicle. It is huge, and I blame somewhat the schools. They are charging an enormous amount of money. When I said that $700,000 is the average debt of a dental student graduating, that's absurd. Where do they start? And our government can forgive. Are they going to forgive $700,000? They might forgive, I don't know, $20,000, $30,000. I know there's access to care, the community dental that my son-in-law went to, and he worked, and he got $20,000 per year forgiven for 4 years serving the underserved. Great start. But we need to lower it, and universities need to stop having this much of a tuition.
We'll go to David next.
So I actually agree with Demi on public service work. Well, hold on, I don't, let's not get carried away here. But I certainly agree that public service workers should get a benefit. And there's a great program, and the Biden administration's done a good job of lowering the debt, if not removing the debt, for a lot of public service workers, whether police, teachers, firefighters, those sorts of healthcare workers. So that's great. And I too had a lot of debt. It took me like 17 years, and I've got a daughter at Tufts now, so I know what a NESCAC tuition bill is like. And I agree with Demi there. I think we've got to do a much better job of trying to get the colleges, quite frankly, to lower their costs. And of course, if we lower the costs overall in the economy, that'll help. But I would say this, I'd be very careful about a program that allows almost anyone to not pay their student loans. I certainly think those students who are making a good income should pay off much of their loan. And I'll stop there.
Great. We'll finish with Jason.
Well, I'll bounce off the white hat Biden administration because they gave Charles Littlejohn, the IRS contractor, 10 times the amount of jail for exposing our corrupt tax bases. So back to student loans, though. With student loans, yes, you've got student loans that keep you from buying a house. I know, I was $160,000 in debt after law school. And I came from a poor family, the kind that you open the door, I'm like, this is not good, and shut the door. But so you have housing, you have debts. We need a system where you can live but actually value that degree. So even in Sweden and Scandinavia, the students there, the degree is free, but they have to pay a portion of their salary over a certain amount of time. Otherwise, you're going to have a system where if these are free degrees and the taxpayers have to pay for it, what about that student that is just avoiding life for 4 years, or is going to get a C- in Elizabethan poetry? You know, not that if that is your major.
Yeah, that's right, you lost that vote.
We need them to value the degree.
Congress has delegated a great deal of its authority over the last 20 years on foreign policy to the presidency. Should Congress be taking a more active role, or do you see it as a constitutional duty to about where we are? We'll start with
Well,
David.
I would say this, is that I do think that Congress needs to play a more active role. I think the presidency has taken on too much authority. And actually, I think I'm the only one here who actually worked for the U.S. government under the State Department. So I've seen directly in a number of countries the role that not only the executive plays, but also Congress. I mean, we get Congress people coming around doing these what we call codels, and they'd pop in like Angus King. He'd pop in for a couple days and come back and say he knows everything that's going on in that particular part of the world. Not to pick on him too much because he's not here. But I do think, getting back to the question, I mean, Congress does not play as definitive a role because it isn't as engaged and isn't as well informed as it should be. So I do think the laws and structures of government need to be clarified, and that's what I would do. I would focus on what's going to make elements in Congress, because I even believe the committee structure needs to change, but has a much better, a much more engaged and informed foreign policy arm within the Congress that can help to guide policy as well as decisions.
Thank you.
Demi.
Here we agree. I think Congress should be much more involved. There is always going to be an emergency situation. Somebody gets attacked, an ally, or we get attacked, and the president has to step in. So we understand that part. But when you're dealing with, for example, Ukraine, $300 billion and more on the way, with no transparency, no end game, possibly endless war, that we have to have Congress and the Senate all be involved to understand. Second of all, defense contractors should not be giving money to candidates who are running for office, because it looks like you've got the war machine going pretty strongly. And we don't, as a veteran, I can tell you, I do not want to see that. So we need to take a look at the structure. I'm in agreement. I think, again, the system is broken and we need more change. And that has to be someplace we got to look into, is how these wars are continuing on.
I'm going to finish off with Jason Cherry.
I do have experience in foreign policy, having been an FBI agent and a liaison with the Five Eye partners and overseas, plenty of overseas travels under the auspices of the State Department. So, but that work was executive. So the question is, should Congress get involved? And I think they should. When you concentrate too much power in one position, you're just asking for trouble. They made some movies about it recently. And again, so to have Congress under this influence of foreign, Russia, you have China, those are the other two superpowers. And, I would say back to Ukraine, I want to talk about that, because some Republicans are saying that Putin should keep his gains. Murdoch, whose Fox News is in 2012, parroting all of Putin's statements. So yes, I do believe Congress should try to get in and try to prevent these parties from being corrupted by foreign influence, whether that's China or Russia.
We'll be moving on now to the next question.
We're going to follow up specifically on foreign policy with regards to the current conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine. As the next potential senator from Maine, what do you think Congress could and should do in each of these conflicts specifically?
We'll go to David Costello.
Starting with David.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, first Ukraine, because I think it's easier, is that, and this is an example where Congress screwed up, quite frankly, as well as the administration hasn't done enough to support Ukraine from my perspective. And so I think in the example with Congress, of course, they held up aid for over 6 months. A lot of Ukrainians died needlessly, and obviously they didn't have the assistance that would have prevented them from losing more territory. So I think here's an example where Congress, ill-informed, made a political decision over a better informed foreign policy decision. And I support a very robust effort to tackle what Putin is attempting to do in Ukraine. In Gaza, or the Middle East more broadly, to me it's a never-ending horror show. I mean, it's an extremely complex situation. Certainly Israel had a right to, and an obligation to defend itself. That was a horrendous terrorist attack on October 7th. And at the same time, Israel, in defending itself, went way, way, way too far. And many of the actions that took place after, in Gaza in particular, are indefensible. The fact that 42,000 Palestinians, more than half of which are probably women and children, is unconscionable, and it's against, and it hurts Israel's security. I would argue we need to do a lot more to work with Israelis who want a credible two-state solution, and maybe we'll talk more in a second go-around.
Absolutely. We'll go to Demi.
We had a two-state solution, right? And then Hamas came along, broke through the border, and slaughtered women and children. I mean, that happened. So Israel is now stuck trying to defend itself and trying to get its hostages back, which is not working very well. I agree. It's a mess over there. It's been a mess for a while. The first thing we did wrong was we appeased Iran. Iran is a bad actor, gave a lot of money to the terrorists, and through allowing it to go ahead and sell oil, and also giving it its money from Carter and other countries that were holding on to their finances. Ukraine. When I was in Germany during the Cold War, and we knew that Russia had the Warsaw Pact, had all these countries, but was having a hard time hanging on to everything. It looked, as we were pumping money into West Germany, East Germany was not doing well. So Russia's going, you know what, I think I want West Germany too. And I want to come across and gain that area. So what did, at that time, Reagan do? He put 250,000 troops into West Germany. I was part of that, right? And what Reagan said to Russia, don't. And they didn't. But you know what? When Biden said to Russia, don't, they did. Peace through strength is important. It means that we don't have war. It means that we go ahead and we stand there and say, don't do it. And it's very important that we have that. And so it's a very complicated situation, but appeasing your enemies does not work.
All right, we'll go next to Jason.
Well, part of my, let me start with Russia and then move to the Gaza Strip conflict. With Russia, I do have classified information about Putin, and I will say, you know, what you see on the news is what you would suspect. He is a monster. He is a monster. He's a butcher. The Ukrainians are the closest to the Russians that they're basically indistinguishable. Ukrainians actually taught me Russian. I speak Russian, and he has destroyed that nation's future. And I am going to, with your help as senator, oppose him. I am not convinced that part of the part of the Republican Party has not been under the influence of Russian government. Tim Pool and a lot of the influencers, $10 million from RTC. Tim Pool actually said we should apologize to Ukraine and give the land to Putin. That type of nonsense, it just makes me angry. It's treasonous. To Gaza, I have the chosen blood, but I'm not practicing, which is the stupid thing, is that people hate me because I might have Jewish blood, or like me because I have Jewish blood. I actually got a job one time for it. But these are people. We must protect them both, and we must look at this conflict in a wide spectrum. The Israelis have the same reaction we did on 9/11, which was turn Middle East into a glass parking lot right after 9/11. Thankfully, we did not go farther. We had Abu Ghraib, but we need the UN to come in as a buffer zone and protect both parties from the war makers.
We will go to David first.
Yeah, so this will give Demi a chance to talk too, because
Yes.
I'm about to. Demi, there was no credible two-state solution before Gaza, before Hamas invaded and terrorized southern Israel. There was no credible two-state. We need to get a credible two-state solution, and we've been decades from that. Certainly we got close in the mid-90s, but we've got a long way to go. So the solution is this, because appeasement, we've appeased the right wing not only in countries, but we've appeased the right wing in Israel. I mean, Netanyahu has not been a credible negotiator, and his right-wing government, hardline government, is at fault for much of what's going on in the Middle East. And that's why we've got to work with progressive Israelis who want a credible two-state solution. It's not to excuse what the Iranians, the hardline right wing in Iran is doing with their proxies. They're terrorists, they're murderers. But it doesn't excuse Israel as well, and we've got to work to build up the progressives in Israel to have a credible two-state solution.
Demi,
You know
were
what?
mentioned.
You know what veterans hate? They hate war. I hate war. I know what war does. I've seen it. I understand it. You don't want a conflict. You want to always stop the conflict before it occurs. Once it occurs, it's hard. The Israelis want their hostages. We have 4 of them. They're American. They're not back. We don't even know if they're alive. We want those people back. At the same time, Egypt didn't open Rafah to allow those women and children to come across and go into areas so they wouldn't be involved in the war. Why not? We give Egypt money too, and they should have allowed the Palestinians to come across. So this is so complicated. At the end, though, we have to always work towards peace and not war. It doesn't matter sometimes who's right and wrong. No war.
Yes.
Just to expound upon the Gaza situation, absolutely agree that what Hamas did was absolutely unconscionable and would, if it happened to us here in the United States, we would turn that into a glass parking lot, or at least talk about it. And we need to talk with the Israeli people that we understand their anger. But at this point, without further support, we need that UN buffer. If you look at religious conflict and strife, it is about land. But in Bosnia, we had to get in with the UN and create a buffer zone so we could find out exactly what the concerns were for both people. Because it's at that point that you can't de-escalate through escalation. There's an anthill that has been pushed up, and the only thing is going to be an international accord talking with both parties. So I mean people from the Bosnian conflict, people from Northern Ireland between the Irish and the Catholics, the Protestants and the Catholics, those people that know how to deal with what it means to be mutually respected.
Right,
Have we got any more points on this we'd like to finish up on? No? We'll move on
All
then.
set.
So during his time in office, Senator King has made efforts to move the state toward renewable energy. Should you be elected senator, what do you plan to do regarding Maine's energy sector and the country as a whole? Demi Kouzounas, we'll start with you.
Sure. So Maine has done quite well, actually. We make up, as far as carbon footprint, 0.1% of the nation's carbon footprint. And we have lots of trees. You know what trees do? They eat, for every 5 trees, they eat 1 ton of CO2 a year. So I think I'm not okay with just cutting trees down so that we can put solar panels that don't work half the time. I think we have a good area for, and I love Maine for its forested areas. Let's talk about wind turbines. I worry because they each leak 80 gallons of oil into the ocean every year, each one. That concerns me too. We need to look, we're at the beginning of understanding how global warming is occurring. We're at the beginning of looking at technology. We need to look further along. But Angus King has been enriched by basically wind turbine. He started independent wind. If you ever went up Aroostook County at Mars Hill, all the tree tops that are gone are all wind turbines. He put those up there and he's enriched himself by that. That's not the way we should be looking at global warming. We should be looking at it as a collaborative, as a whole, because we love our environment.
Jason Cherry, we'll hear from you next.
I would agree with the approach. So at this point, a portion of that, of course, is climate change. Is what do we do about climate change? Do we stay flat-footed? Do we not prepare for the future? And electrifying the national transportation grid is preparing for the future. It is a matter of pouring research money into batteries, which are the main hiccup, is how to keep a well-charged battery into a vehicle and allow it to go further than 200 miles. So that I would continue on with that work as Angus King has done. He does have investments in renewable energies. He does, his work is there, but that's neither here nor there. It's a policy that is focused on the future, the future of our Earth. And the last I checked, we only had one planet. And this is the biggest business risk management 101. So all my business and trade acumen says that this is risk management. We must go and work forward with our renewable energies. That includes hydroelectric, but under an agreement with Calgary that seems to own our electric grid, that we want a better profit sharing.
And finally, David Costello.
Well, a couple of things. One, what we need is, quite frankly, and I think most of you know this, that every time scientists have taken a look at climate change, it's been worse than they imagined, and it continues to grow worse and worse. than scientists imagine. And everybody's starting to realize the impacts. They're very real. Part of my job in Maryland was I oversaw Maryland's development of a climate action plan between 2008 and 2015. And I've always agreed since then, if not earlier, not only do we have to support incentives, and these incentives, whether it's for clean energy or energy efficiency or rural electrification for EVs, all of that is good. And we need to put more resources into doing that. But what we need to do more importantly is we need to price carbon. 3,500 economists have said for decades, over a decade, that the most effective way to reduce emissions, as well as to generate, to electrify, beneficially electrify our economy, is by putting a price on carbon fee, carbon tax, and to make sure it doesn't hurt states like Maine, then you can design a fee in a way that is less impactful on rural areas, which require more transportation, and lower income households. And we can maybe talk about that more later.
We're going to follow up with Maine lobstermen and wind power have competing claims over territory in Maine. How would, as Senator, you go about embarking upon that?
Which one?
Let's start with Jason.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of wind power as well as solar, certainly geothermal. The right kind of hydro, it depends on the dam, the location of the dam, and its impact on the environment, on fisheries. As far as wind power, Maine, the Gulf of Maine is probably one of the best areas to have floating wind turbines. And that's what the state's attempting to do. So I certainly support that. You want to do it in a way that minimizes the impact on the fisheries. And I think the Mills administration, the Biden administration, through the Department of the Interior, is doing a good job of doing that. You know, the location is important. Much of Maine's lobstering, as I think most people know, happens within 3 miles of shore. So much of these floating wind turbines are going to be considerably out away from shore. So again, it depends on the design, but I'm a big supporter of offshore wind, and I think it's a big part of our future, our energy future. And I would say this, we're going to have to also expand our grid by at least threefold nationally. So we need a lot more federal money. Give me that carbon fee, and we'll start to talk about real business. Yeah.
Demi Kouzounas, you know.
So those wind turbines make ocean noise. That ocean noise affects our whales. I have an issue with that. That's the migrating area of those whales. We need to get a better look at where, because what we don't want to do is change, you know, in trying to fix our globe, we don't want to also hurt it. As far as global climate change, the United States and EU have dropped their carbon emissions by 10 to 15%. You know who hasn't? China and India. Xi Jinping said last year he's going to drop it by 1%. Well, 1% came and went, he didn't do it. So now he's saying in 24 he's going to do it. And I don't think he's going to do it then either. They're building one coal-fired plant. I've been to China. Let me tell you, when you look up at the sun, it looks like the moon on a kind of a cloudy day as it's emerging out of the atmosphere. We need to really be concerned about global and incentivizing China and India to do their part to stop global change.
And finally, Jason Cherry.
Okay, so back to your question about wind power and lobstermen here in Maine. In that question, as an independent, I want to take the role as an executive representative. And what that means is that all of you have inherited some portion of government power through the US Constitution. And it's like a probate, where I have to listen to both sides before I make a decision. And in this decision, the jury's still out on whether or not those wind turbines do create a disturbance to the lobster beds. And so I would hear the lobstermen out, or lobster people, lobster personnel, fishermen, fisheries. I'm Gen X, I'm getting used to pronouns and everything. So, I would say that that to have those both sides discuss their portions of that issue is what I would need to make a decision on that.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on. In the last couple of years, the Supreme Court has acted as a significantly important role in policy making and on certain policy decisions. How do you feel about the role of the court? Are they overreaching, or are they participating in the proper working of checks and balances? We're going to start with David.
overreaching in a massive way. And what I would actually think we need to do, we need to reform the Supreme Court. And we also need to reform the Senate and the Electoral College, which allowed a Supreme Court that is representative of the interests of maybe 15% of the United States to be doing what it's doing, whether it's regarding taking away women's reproductive rights, which they've done, allowing money, dark money, to just flow from corporations and wealthy Americans to corrupt our political system. They've supported, they've allowed. So my idea for reforming the Supreme Court is basically term limits of 20 years roughly, and retirement ages of no older than 80. And also, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed, although I don't think we need to start there, with conceivably putting more members on the Supreme Court. Because the Supreme Court we have today is definitely working against the interests of the vast majority of Americans. And that needs to change, and I'm quite frankly quite afraid of what might happen after Tuesday if the next president gets to pick 2 more members of that court.
Jason Jarrell, we'll hear from you next.
So one of my duties was a legal instructor for new agents, and I had to read James Madison's notes and understand the Supreme Court law, and I had to read a lot of opinions. And again, folks, it's this Democrat versus Republican. You know, they're blaming each other for the canned responses from the Supreme Court, because those are the most vetted people in the world. All you need is 5 Supreme Court justices to rule the law of the land, and that has always been our Achilles heel. I want these people elected. I want greater public ownership of government, but this reform, age limits, term limits, are not going to pass unless we push ranked choice voting out to all states, to all positions. We need a third choice. We cannot continue on these closed echo chambers and this finger pointing about the Supreme Court justices, because there's just as many Democratic Supreme Court justices that are far to the left that are not neutral.
All right, we're going to go to Demi next.
So my parents left Greece to come to the United States. You want to know why? This is the best country in the world. We have really, each one of us, the ability to vote. We each one have the ability to take control. And I think when we start trying to undo 250 years of history because we think we can do better, I think we're going to run into problems. I think we need to look at term limits, because our ancestors were more concerned about how young you were coming into politics than it was at how old you were, because nobody was living past 60 and 70 years old, right? But now we are. So we need to revise, and I'm fine with that, but we need to be careful we don't make it partisan. And what I'm hearing, I don't like that decision, so let's fix the Supreme Court. I don't like that decision because I don't like, you know, how it went. We don't want it to be partisan. The whole idea of not electing the Supreme Court justices is not to make it partisan. So we elect the people that then turn around and still elect the Supreme Court justices. We need to just be very involved in our politics. We all need to vote, and we all need to understand that we still live in the best country in the world.
Yes, Jason?
So the fallacy in that logic is that we can elect these people, and we can have a meritocracy. That's the ultimate. So if we stay in an immutable government, this Constitution is over 230 years old. It is old, folks. It is the most operational Constitution. We need competency measures. We need accountability measures. We need transparency measures. There is nothing in the Constitution that requires the government to communicate with us or have a meritocracy.
A couple of things. I would agree with Jason on what he said, and that's why I'd say take a look at my accountability, my idea for a commission, accountability performance commission and performance commission and planning commission for the United States. And I agree with Demi that America is exceptional now, or reasonably exceptional, so we don't have to be great again. We're pretty good for the most part. So thanks for that, Demi. I'm just teasing a little. But getting back to one issue as it relates to whether or not this is a massive partisan issue. It's only a partisan issue, quite frankly, because the Republican Party has put in place people who aren't genuine jurists. I mean, in many respects, they're partisan. I mean, Mitch McConnell got what he wanted. He wanted to say no to Obama, and his proudest accomplishment is the courts, not only the Supreme Court, but the federal judiciary has been larded with partisan actors. It's not the Democratic Party's fault. And I can talk more about that later, about whose fault gridlock and dysfunction in Washington is, and it's not the Democrats.
We're going to finish up and give Demi a chance to respond.
It's
I
not,
figured
huh?
she might want to.
Listen, we're all involved. There's no picking on sides. And with all due respect, Senator King, who votes 98% of the time with one party, is an independent also. So party politics always plays, right? Everybody says, no, it's this person, that. It's politics. And we understand it. That's why we want to be involved. That's why you need to vote. That's why you need to be involved. We need somebody that's not been in government before. I've not been in government before, ever. I am a dentist, and I served my country. And I believe in term limits, too. 2 terms, done. And that would take care of a lot of issues. Otherwise, these people keep on getting PAC money, and they stay in, and they keep on running, and that's where things go awry, if you ask me.
We're going to move on now to closing statements. And so I'm going to ask, as before you do your closing statements, why should people vote for you instead of the incumbent Senator King? And we'll start with
Was it me?
Demi
Yep.
Kouzounas.
Thank you all for joining. And this was great. Actually, more fun than I thought it was going to be.
And she's a dentist.
And I'm a dentist. And I work with drills. No, I'm just kidding. So what you're hearing is a lot of talk about politics and policy, and we should be more bipartisan. But you know what? We're not. And it's unfortunate. Senator King says he's bipartisan. He's an independent. But he votes 98.5. Do you know what 98.5? I've been married for a lot of years. There's not probably one day that I can say I agree with my husband 98.5% of the time. And there's probably very few human beings that agree with each other 98.5% of the time. That means you're going along to get along. That system doesn't work. We need to have lively discord. We need to talk to each other. We need to sit down, and when we disagree, find out why we disagree. And that's okay. I think it actually is great. I love that. We also need to problem solve, and we're not doing that either because we keep on going along to get along or maybe get the money, right? And that's not okay either. What we need to do is figure out why we have a border system that is broken. Fentanyl's coming across. It is 50 times stronger than heroin. You don't have enough Narcan probably in your car. I have 2 doses because I worry about that. Because if I see somebody that has a fentanyl overdose, one Narcan might not quite do it. We also have humanitarian. Women and children being trafficked. We're not addressing that. How can we not address this? We need to look at inflation. It's going to hurt you all more than it's going to hurt anybody else. We need to talk about other issues, housing, other issues that are going on, energy costs in the state of Maine. Like I said before, I'm a veteran, I'm a mom, I'm a small business owner, yes, and I'm a dentist. And I want to bring a new idea, a new approach. And finally, only 25 women senators in Washington, D.C. We're 50%. Let's bring another woman into Washington, D.C., and let's see if we can make a difference. And with that, I thank you, and I humbly ask for your vote.
David Costello.
So first regarding Senator King, then I'll tell you why I'm a partisan Democrat, but more importantly, why I think we really need to fix our broken system of government. I appreciate that Senator King caucuses with Democrats. I'm not quite sure it's 98% of the time, but he certainly caucuses with Democrats. He's a safe bet. But the concern I have about Senator King is from my perspective, he's been overly cautious throughout his career. And trying to cut deals with Joe Manchin. Well, I'm sorry, Joe Manchin doesn't really want to work with Democrats. He talks about reaching across the aisle. I understand it's a great PR. It's good to say, bipartisanship, but we haven't had a Congress that truly has been bipartisan since the 1970s. So what I would say is this: if we really want to get important work done, if we want to protect women's reproductive rights, if we want to truly address climate change, if we want to deal with unaffordable housing and health care, if we want to deal with foreign policy challenges like in Gaza in a more robust way, where the United States has more leverage, if we want a green economy that'll drive thousands, millions of jobs and income and economic output, we need a Congress that is more functional. We need a government that is more accountable. And the only way to do that is take a look at my website, again, costelloforsenate.com, and take a look at my reform agenda, because if we can't reform the structures and the governing practices, we're not going to get all of this policy work. And the reason I say I'm a proud Democrat is because the Democratic Party over the last 30 years, ever since I've been active and involved in government, has for the most part been willing to compromise, been putting forward reasonably popular solutions, whether it's Medicare for all who want and need it, whether it's universal pre-K and aftercare, solid programs that'll make a difference to families in need as well as generating economic output. Infrastructure, we got 10% of what we truly need. And that it took us 20 years to get that bill, and I'll stop, but I'll stop.
Thanks so much.
No, and I don't support filibustering, so that's why. Yeah.
Jason Cherry.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about Democrats and Republicans. At the state and local level, I have less concern about them. And why you should vote for me is, after the Epstein debacle, where President Clinton was at that island 6 times, and they do a survey every time, and that the Republican Department of Justice gave him home detention for trafficking in 13-year-old girls. Both parties are corrupt at the top, too much corruption, too much of their closed echo chambers. And so as Mainers, in their wisdom, you passed ranked choice voting so that you would have other candidates. I'm a candidate who's dedicated to the ideals of justice, of balance, of reasonableness, which built this country. The Bill of Rights was a degree of reasonableness. Both these parties, this presidential election has been a travesty. The news, oh, Biden's fine, Biden's not fine. And we're supposed to trust these same news. And over here, there's, to the right, to the Republicans, there's disinformation. They will use every dirty trick to stay in power, send them a message, send a true independent to DC, and I will be the representative. I will listen to all sides. I will use my legal skills so that when somebody asks me something besides, what is your policy? I'll say, I can study the case law. I can write policy. How great would that be for a legislator to have a legal degree? I have a background in economics, international trade, and business. I have 25 years of federal service, and I love it. It's a passion for me. It's a higher calling. And the higher calling means that I would be independent, that I would work for you, and to tell both parties, look, it's reform or revolution.
All right, thanks so
Well,
much.
ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up tonight's debate. We'd like to give a hand of applause to our 3 candidates who joined us tonight. Firstly, we'd like to start by thanking all of you in the audience here today and all of you who have joined us online for joining and getting involved in this democratic election. We'd like to thank Student Activities, AV, and everyone who has helped in some way put this together as well.
And just a reminder, Election Day is November 5th, so make sure you get out to vote. Remember, there's same-day registration in Maine. The polls are open until 8. And thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.